I never know which is better. All right. Well, thank you, Will Styler, for coming out to talk about the opposite of cheating,
Absolutely.
teaching for integrity in the age of AI. Why don't we start with you introducing who you are? People that are maybe not have, or who have read the book might have seen your name in there, but why don't you give them a little bit about your title, where you work, and what you teach in kind of the context of your classes?
Sure. So I'm Will Styler. I am a associate teaching professor of linguistics at UC San Diego as well. I'm also the director of the computational social science program, which is just sort of an interdisciplinary program that brings together people who like to use computational methods and concepts to address human questions.
Cool. I didn't
So
know that.
yeah. So that's a joy as well. But the majority of my teaching work is in linguistics. And as a teaching professor, I really care a lot about pedagogy and trying sort of new approaches. And um, I've been getting increasingly discontent with the status quo of teaching as time goes on. And so increasingly more goblin mode, so to speak. And
Yeah.
that may show in this interview. Apologize.
No, no, that's all good. So maybe for those who aren't familiar with UCSD, we should tell them what a teaching professor is and how it differs from
Yeah.
other types of professors.
Absolutely. So in the at UCSD, it's sort of or I'm sorry, school specific even within the UC system. But we are also Senate faculty in most departments. We have all the same voting rights, things like that. Not talking about the other departments at the moment, but nonetheless, and we have a higher teaching load. Most faculty here have a teaching load of 4 courses a year. We usually end up with 6.
Okay.
And so, also as a part of our advancement process, teaching is sort of favored above research, as opposed to sort of the opposite on the other end of things. So, same basic idea, same basics flavor of faculty, just a lot more teaching and a lot more emphasis on teaching as a
And
part of our.
a lot more research on teaching, right? A lot of
Yes,
teaching
absolutely.
professors, their research is on pedagogy, not on their disciplinary subject matter expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. I have actually tended more towards the disciplinary
Okay.
research side of things, but have been doing a lot of side projects, so to speak, a lot of side quests in teaching and developing new tools for teaching,
Cool.
uh, leveraging technology and things like that. So,
Yeah. Cool. And give a the audience's estimate of like the size of your classes. Do they go from like how small to how big?
on the small end, I just finished a grad seminar with 8 people, which was lovely.
Nice.
But I think my bigger classes are around 150 people.
Okay.
Linguistics is not a huge major on
Right.
campus. And so, yeah, but the majority of my classes are someplace in the probably 60 to 120 range, with occasional heading down or up, depending on where I'm teaching.
Yeah, yeah. And so, of course, that's big classes to some people that might be listening to this and small to others.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, of course, this our book is about teaching for integrity. David and I are both practitioners and authors and researchers about academic integrity. So we have to ask this question. What is your first memory of encountering this idea or this phrase, this notion of academic integrity?
Yeah, so when you'd send me these questions, I started thinking about it, and like it's actually not abundantly clear because I remember sort of that feeling of being scolded en masse by librarians. I think in my high school there was an assembly at which they yelled at us about
Plagiarism.
plagiarism
That's what
primarily, yeah.
librarians, yeah.
And that was really the main thing that was discussed. And you kind of knew that you don't look at the answers of the person next door, but that wasn't like really a thing. Then I got to my college, undergrad college was University of Colorado at Boulder,
Hmm.
and there they have the honor code, is sort of their uh, sort of a mix between
Your proof.
organization and statement. And they were very big on, I will, you sign the little pledge on
Yep.
things, and little performative, but they did a pretty decent job of like at orientation, kind of giving a more detailed ontology of sleaze associated with all of this. And so, talk more about all the various other things that are not a good idea to be doing above and beyond plagiarism and,
Yeah.
copying your friend's homework.
Yeah. And hopefully talked about the positive, the aspirational part of academic integrity too. No? Oh, darn.
Fortunately, yeah, it was
Um,
almost entirely, I was raised in this just being punitive, scolding, scorn.
Boulder.
Uh,
Let's talk if it's still like that. That was a while ago, though. Well,
yeah, I very much hope they've gotten better about it. But yeah, and that unfortunately had a negative influence on me as a teacher, I think, getting started.
oh, yeah.
So it was
Oh,
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then did you come here right from your PhD?
No, I did a 3-year postdoc, but I was non-teaching,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay.
But I spent some time, did my PhD also at Boulder, and then spent some time at University of Michigan.
Okay.
But wasn't really doing much teaching beyond the occasional guest lecture.
Got it. All
So
right. And then you
glad
became
to
a
come
teaching
back to teaching.
professor, ironically. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, well, I did a lot of teaching in grad school. We
Wow.
had students served as instructor of record a lot. And in my case, I was one of 2 people in my subdiscipline for most of my
Wow.
time there.
Okay.
And so when my advisor would go on leave or something like that, I'm teaching the the main class in our subfield.
Okay.
So
Oh,
yeah,
good.
I had a lot of good teaching opportunities. I've
Yeah.
taught more than I've TA'd, which is
Okay. Oh,
hilarious. It's
interesting. Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and of
So
course, even when we've had tons of teaching experience, no one ever actually taught us how to do it, right? Or how to design valid assessments or any of that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Did you get some?
Actually, so to CU's credit, they
Oh,
had
okay.
the graduate teaching program. Laura Border was the person running it at the time,
Nice.
and where it was really aimed for graduate teachers, both instructor of record and TA level. And so there, they had like a teaching consulting thing. They
Yeah.
did a lot of really good
Okay.
work getting me actual pedagogical
Oh,
theory.
great.
And like I did some classes for them later on. So I was fairly heavily involved with them, and that put me in a much better place.
Ah, nice. And I know we
So
do that here too. The
yeah,
Engaged Teaching Hub does that here too for
exactly.
our grad students as well. So that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So you hinted earlier that you like to like tinker around with tools for teaching and everything. In our book, you're one of the folks along with Wei Wei Key and other people here at UCSD that have tinkered around with oral assessment. So I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about how you use how and why you use oral assessment in your classes, and then anything else you want to touch on that you think you do that you do because of wanting to ensure students are learning and to ensure that you're validating actual knowledge and abilities.
Yeah. Oral assessment to me is a tool solving a problem, right? Even in a 120 person class, it's not feasible for everybody, but there are a number of places where, and every quarter you get the students with very reasonable exceptions, right? I have 4 finals scheduled this day, or something like that,
Nice.
or any variety of things where it's just like, yeah, okay, let's help you out. And I don't want to write a brand new version of a large multiple choice test, and it's
Don't want to
that's
and
not a great
can't. You
thing.
don't have the time.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't have the time, and frankly, I don't have the care to. And if I show them the exam earlier, I may trust this student, but should I? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
So instead, I sort of decided after seeing actually a talk in KEMSI, our teaching and learning sort
Yeah.
of focus group, for lack of a better term, on campus.
Learning community,
Yeah,
maybe?
learning
Yeah.
community, sure. I like that. But a bunch of teaching nerds get together, and somebody gave a talk on oral assessment. I want to say it was Sahar, but either way.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, like, and so then I started using it. And initially, I'd started doing this sort of immediately before the Zoom times, if you will.
Yeah.
And I just decided I could replace my main exam. This is mostly for Ling 101 where I do this, but I've done it for other classes as
Okay.
well, where I sort of look at the study guide and then identify a few questions that I can kind of have a conversation with somebody about that will show me that they understand a number of things.
So you
And
do this not instead of a written final or
I,
like instead
instead
or
of
in
the written
addition
final
to?
entirely,
Okay.
uh, for these students specifically who
Just for
need,
the makeup
yeah,
or
just in the makeup
alternate time
cases.
students. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I'll come up with a list of questions. The other nice thing is in linguistics, a lot of our teaching is actually like algorithmic learning outcomes. So
Okay.
it's like getting them to understand how you do this kind of analysis on data. Oral exams are really well suited to that because I can hand a student a problem set and say, okay, here's a problem set.
Hmm.
Solve it and talk me through. right? And that gives me lots of opportunities for sort of partial credit in places, which is very nice. And it gives me lots of opportunities to kind of ask probing questions. And I tell the students ahead of time, the fact that I'm asking an additional question doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means in many cases, I want to give you a chance to show me that you know more, right? But so I'll kind of ask probing questions about what they're doing, or sometimes I'll ask them, explain to me what the difference between, in our case, a phoneme and a morpheme, a unit of sound and meaning, are.
Hmm.
And then I might ask some additional follow-ups. And it's been actually really nice. In many ways, most students kind of come in feeling nervous. I have a website that kind of tells them everything to expect.
Yeah, and we'll give folks a link to your website too.
Great.
Yeah.
Most students start off a little bit nervous, but within a
Hmm.
couple of minutes, I can usually kind of get them to a place where we're having a conversation. Uh,
Mm,
and that feels, I think, a lot better for them. And I also give them very explicitly, as you'll read, a chance at the end to correct anything. Like the last, if functional question is, what
okay.
do you want to fix?
Ah,
And oftentimes they'll say, and it's sort of impressive, like, oh, well, earlier when I was answering the second question, I think I might have said this instead of that. And I meant that. Uh,
nice.
and it makes it very much nicer. And so
And how long do these take? Depends.
usually around 45 minutes to an hour, depending on
Oh,
the
wow.
student.
Okay.
Yeah. I
For a
spend a fair amount of
final.
time
So
with them.
instead of a 3 hour final. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and oftentimes, as I said, it varies depending on the student, right? Some people take the full 7 minutes to look through the data, and I kind of give like guardrails of like, okay, I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this question. They never need 10 minutes in practice, but and so as I'm doing this, I'm sort of keeping notes. I have a little spreadsheet open showing me, question and then notes, and that way, when a student makes some, mistake or something like that, I can just kind of write down. I tell them ahead of time. I could be typing good things or bad things. Don't think about that part. But yeah, and then ultimately they sort of let me know what they know, and I'm able to sort of add everything up, and I kind of have the math done in this spreadsheet ahead of time, and
Mm,
able to hand them their grade right there at the end,
oh,
which is
wow.
very nice. Um, so
So I know it's only for kind of makeup
yeah,
students. So how many do you, because 45, I can hear most listeners going 45 to 60 minutes. I can't do that. So how
yeah,
many are
I
you
get
having
that.
to do?
I mean, in practice, it varies a lot
Yeah.
quarter by quarter. I would say on the high end, I've done like five, but
Okay.
usually it's one or two.
Okay.
Right. I have the advantage of UCSD has the Triton Testing Center,
Hmm.
which you are running,
Yeah.
among other things. And it's lovely and has taken some of the pressure off for students who have, for instance, accommodations.
Yes.
So I'm able to kind
Good
of,
point.
yeah, take care of or allow you all to help me to take care of those things. Which is also nice because for a lot of those students, there's a lot of anxiety around test taking. And so the consistency of one place is lovely.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest, just for listeners. So we have a Triton Testing Center for accommodated students, makeup students, but we also have a computer-based testing facility, which we're going to have to get Will into probably at some point.
Oh, yes.
But accommodated students, just we know them by name because they're regulars. They have told us it just makes my testing experience so much less anxiety provoking, and almost, dare I say, enjoyable for as good as a testing experience can be.
Yeah, it's sort of gone in a few years from like, wait, what's the Triton Testing Center? Oh no, to
Yeah.
wait, you're using Triton testing, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
been lovely.
And
But
it's
anyway,
great,
so
great for integrity. Yeah.
yeah, and the best validation, for me, I'm always wondering like, are these oral exams fair? Are they getting at what I'm
That's what
getting
I was going
at?
to ask you.
Yeah, and for me, my method of validating my tests is that most students should have test grades in line with their homeworks and overall performance in the class.
Hmm.
Right. Like if a student there will of course be outliers, right? The person who has chat GPT'd their way through all the homeworks is going to have a rough time on the test.
Not going to do so
Right.
well.
Yeah, no. But and similarly, there are some rough test takers, but by and large, the oral exam tracks really, really well with the final exam in terms of average score for the students, as well as it tends to track the student's homework grade very well. It
Okay.
tends not to affect the student final grade substantially. which I think is often a good measure of a
That's
test.
that sounds like a great measure.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, I know some of our friends over in engineering,
Mhm.
they will use much shorter oral assessments to follow up on questions from the written exam. So say you're saying the homework usually tracks to test scores, but sometimes people blow a test. Have you ever done that where you're like, wow, you really should have done better. I'm going to orally quiz you on a couple of things to see.
I have done that on occasion in situations where I think there's an academic integrity issue going on.
Yes, which is the other reason they do it sometimes too. Yeah.
Yeah, particularly in cases where, and I haven't had to do this as much, I think lately, but generally speaking, if a student, for instance, submits something that is way far and above their level of knowledge that one would expect,
Yeah.
um, I can very, very quickly sniff out like, oh, you're just a giant nerd and you've been doing a lot of research.
Right.
Amazing.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, something's up here.
Yeah.
And so, generally speaking, I've done that sort of more informally.
Uh,
The idea of like a post sampling of like test scores or of homeworks, I like the idea of it very much. I don't particularly have the instructional staff time, I think, to implement it well. And I
yeah.
would be a little worried about doing like delegating that kind of thing to TAs as well.
Well, so that's what our engineering and folks that are listening, I will be interviewing the engineering folks as well, but they actually that was their research project is how to scale this up using TAs.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
mean,
they've had some good results. Yeah.
and with a TA that I really, really trust, absolutely, they could do a great
Sure.
job of this. But
Yeah.
I can also think of people who I really wouldn't want to put in that situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, this
so
is what I'm thinking between, AI maybe speeding up or making some of your other parts of your job and your IA's job more efficient. And maybe if you were sending all your students to test in the CBTF, would
yeah,
you have more time to do some of those oral assessment follow-ups?
yeah, absolutely. And my perspective on this, right or wrong, is that generally speaking, when I design my courses, early on in my career, I was very much into the cat and mouse game of academic integrity. Like I make a cheatable assignment, they cheat, I catch them, I get all indignant, and
Yes.
then yeah, and I've kind of realized over time that that means no one's doing any more learning,
No.
and so I've sort of settled in a place where I write the homeworks. I do my best to build compassion into course policies so that a student who he might be a great student who cares but gets caught up in a bad situation
Okay.
isn't tempted to sleaze.
Great.
Um, and then also I try to write assignments that are about as much work to do honestly as they are to do, sleazily.
Yeah.
Um, and so, that's of course not perfect. And I know
Oh,
there's
but the exam
ChatGPT stuff.
scores track too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But my goal basically is, the homeworks, I'm not watching all that carefully for academic integrity issues because I've tried to write them in such a way that it's hard. I have the advantage that ChatGPT is bad for my field, which
Ah,
is hilarious as a computational linguist to say.
is behind. So a lot
Yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah. It
yeah.
is, it is well behind. We tried to implement like a virtual tutoring
Yeah.
system, and it worked very poorly for my
Yeah.
world. Um,
Wow.
so a
Interesting.
system designed by linguists failing at linguistics is sort of lovely.
Ironic. Ironic.
Yeah. But
Um,
anyways, but I use the test basically as sort of a sure, you can cheat your way through most of the class, and you know what? Good for you. You're going to be great in politics someday. But
ouch.
yeah, sorry. Um, but at the same time, that when the test comes around, you're going to get your comeuppance because I'm using generally big, in lecture hall multiple choice style tests
Yeah.
because A, that's what's easy to grade, and B, it's diagnostic.
Yeah.
Right? And I feel like that will sort of reset the scale. I'm really interested in what some of my colleagues are doing. Mia Minez in computer science, and I've been chatting a lot about sort of different policies that sort of may favor the exam or the homework in ways that are better diagnostic of student
Mm,
performance and that
mm,
handle those sort of discontinuities a little bit better.
yeah.
Um, but for the moment, I'm sort of looking at it in terms of I'm not going to play the cat and mouse game. You're
No.
either going to learn it and do great on the test and the homeworks. You're going to learn it and cheat your way through the homeworks and get wrecked by the test, or yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
Well,
kind of
and
my
that's what,
point at this point.
no, I appreciate that. I mean, we never want to promote faculty ignoring cheating because everything can be a
No.
teachable moment. At the same
Yeah.
time, I agree with you that in the age of AI, we can't secure every single assessment, right? And so we just need to make sure that some assessments are secure so that we can validate student learning. And if
Yeah.
they forego, just gave up on the idea of learning that, if you're doing it right as a teacher, the knowledge that they were supposed to gain in during those formative assessments, their homeworks, should help them, demonstrate that knowledge on the exams. That's only a
Yeah.
problem if those things aren't connected, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And there are so many kinds of things that I do to make sure that most of their learning is not is experiential. We have
Right.
sections. We have them doing this work. One of my tools that I've developed is an interactive tutor, not using, this is not like AI, this is like
Okay.
if statements for doing transcription in the International Phonetic Alphabet, where I just know a bunch of the common mistakes and I have the student try it. And then when they make the mistake, up pops something that says, hey, you just did this. Let's talk.
Oh. So
Um,
are they doing this on their own computers in
they're
class?
doing this on their own computers. It is completion graded. They get a code at the
Oh.
very end of it that says you did it. But that made a massive impact, even though
Oh.
the homework is basically free. It's like, do this thing, you must complete it, but it will tell you the answers as you do.
Yeah.
And it had a massive, massive
Ah.
impact. And they can't really cheat on it because it's like, what are you going to do? Get the answers from your roommate and go through the process anyways?
Right. Right.
And so, those are the kinds of things I try to do to make the
Interesting.
learning happen in a way that it doesn't even make sense to cheat on.
Yeah.
Or like working in section through a problem set, like you can't really cheat there.
Yeah.
You're going to learn whether you want to or not.
And when they're in section working through problem sets, they're working in groups, I'm assuming,
Yeah,
not
generally
individually.
speaking,
Yeah.
lone wolves happen.
Yeah. And so are you teaching mostly majors then, linguistics majors?
It kind of varies on class. My Ling
Okay.
101 class is probably a third majors,
A third.
generally.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of people who are we have the joy of a lot of bilingual students who want to learn more about to an extent, their experience
Oh,
and about their
okay.
languages, but are actually doing biochemistry or something like that.
Okay.
So they might never consider a major, but they want to at least get a little of it.
And
Um,
they engage and they find it, you don't find a difference between your major students and your non-major in terms of like we think about the intrinsic motivation to learn, right? Is there
yeah.
a difference between
Oh,
them?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not it's not clear, right? Like oftentimes, yes, I have massive nerds in my major that are
Yeah.
dedicated and doing the extra work. But also, it's been the case that in a number of quarters, my best performing students have been from other
Mm,
majors
okay.
and unapologetically not even thinking about it, but just really got into it for that moment. And so, I tell my students directly at the start, like first day of class, what matters most to me is your effort, right? If you blow off the class, we're going to blow you right back off. But if
Yeah.
you really are here to learn, we'll bend over backwards to make sure you get there. And so
Yeah.
I think, I try really hard to incentivize, even if you don't actually care, if you pretend well enough, you might have a good time. Um,
Fake it till you make it.
yeah, exactly. And there are certainly students who don't.
Yeah.
And oftentimes those are the ones who are doing sleazy things anyways, where they just
Yeah.
like, oh, I heard it's an easy A, but this is really hard. Like,
Yeah, every professor loves to hear that the students heard their class was an easy A. So,
yeah,
so since you just mentioned a sleazy again, not my word of choice for
fair
describing
enough.
what students do, but yeah. So I know you've had to respond to cheating.
Yeah.
I know you've had to report cases. So what have you learned in that process? It's one of the least favorite things for faculty to do. So what have you learned? What advice would you give somebody else?
You know, I mean, it's always very variable, right? Like the majority of students, if you just sort of sit down, I mean, one thing I've learned is bring receipts, right? It is a very different thing and oftentimes I will ask a student to come to office hours to talk about things or to come to my office, et cetera. But like, it's a different thing to ask, what happened on homework one, which is usually what I'll start with,
Yeah.
but then to show, hey, turns out like and comparing directly answers and things like that, and that will by and large solicit them to take responsibility
Yeah.
and tell me more about what was their motivation, like why did this happen, what
Yeah.
can we do in the future so that it never does again,
Yeah.
right? And that's always what I prefer.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, I've found that when you bring pretty clear evidence of, like, this is the Wikipedia page on French,
Right.
this is your homework,
Right.
it tends to be a little bit easier. But yeah, so I've noticed that has been useful for me. I think
Has a student ever thanked you for that kind of intervention?
not yet. I don't know necessarily ever. I know I've had students who have. One of my other big pet peeves is sort of grade grubbing. It's not necessarily an academic integrity issue,
Yeah.
but like the grade lawyering, the oh my
Hmm.
God, if I don't do this, I'm never going to get into med school. Dude, you're a
Yes.
freshman. Calm down, please.
Yes.
Um, But like I have an entire website about grade changes that I put on screen regularly that kind of talks about what are good things to ask for regrades about and what are ways that you can do this in a, I'll say sleazy, but however
Yeah.
you would like, low
Yeah.
integrity way.
Yeah.
And I've had students kind of, when I point out like, hmm, you take a look at this. You just did 1 through 10 over here under grade lawyering. I'm not going to hold that against you. You're still going to get graded like everybody else, but at the same time, you do that in another class, it's going to really wreck you.
Yeah.
And I've had students thank me there
Okay.
because it's at least, I hope, good advice
Yeah.
for them.
We
So
should
that's
share.
a place where they seem to appreciate
Yeah,
it.
we should share that link too. But these are all on just your website, right? That I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
just
yeah.
share.
Yep.
And so that brought me up. So brings me to an impromptu question here. You come across as both a very caring professor, you care about student learning, and and a bit of a hard ass. And so do
Oh no.
students, right? Like
Yeah,
you're very you're here's the agreed upon rules for engagement,
yeah,
and it's your choice whether you engage with those rules or not. But if you don't, like you're not gonna, I'm not
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
go, okay, I'll look the other way. So, what are your one thing faculty are always concerned about, especially adjunct faculty or brand new faculty, are teaching evaluations. And I know we've here moved towards a more holistic approach, but how do students respond to you in
I think
teaching?
by and large pretty well.
Yeah.
My teaching evaluations have looked fairly good, given there's a lot about teaching evaluations, not about teachers.
Yes.
But I've both benefited from some of those aspects, but also I think generally a lot more students see the compassion. And my goal basically is to be very, very kind up until
Yeah.
you force me not to be.
Yeah.
And I try to really, and there are so many cases, and you know this better
Yeah.
than anybody, I'm sure, but like there are so many cases where academic integrity issues or just low integrity work is masking something worse going on in their lives.
Yes.
And I am, I think a lot about trauma in higher education and how that works. And again, I have another big thing on my website
Oh, great.
talking about how to support students in that
Oh,
situations. But like,
wonderful.
yeah, very often though, I'll find that if a student is doing something that is both kind of low integrity and weird, it's usually masking something else. And if I ask them, hey,
Yeah.
101 aside, what's up?
Yeah.
Like, are you okay?
Great.
That's where oftentimes it can be. And so my goal is not to kind of, once you cross this line, you're dead to me forever. But students can certainly earn that position. And there are students who I've said, at this point, you will be graded exactly per the syllabus. No grade changes, no regrades, no exception requests will be
Yeah.
entertained.
Yeah.
And that's where they hit the hard boundary. But I think by and large, more students see sort of the compassion and they see the kindness than see the rigidity and boundaries.
Well,
And that's my goal to keep it
boundaries are
that way.
good. Boundaries are
Yeah.
good. So
Yeah.
we're almost out of time, so I want to make sure I ask you what advice do you have for faculty who are really struggling right now? I know you said Gen AI doesn't really impact your field so much, but still, what advice do you have for ones that are just like, I don't know what to do anymore in the age of
Yeah.
Gen AI in terms of integrity and teaching and assessing learning?
Um, my biggest piece of advice is that technology will not save you. There is no, and I don't know what your feelings are about this, but as a computational linguist who's done LLM work, AI detection is not a thing and will never be a thing. Anybody who is selling you that is, well, let me put it this way. If you need warm fuzzies, send me $1,000 and I'll flip a coin every time you email me. And we should get pretty similar
Yeah.
results. And similarly, during the pandemic, online proctoring, is yet another thing that should probably
Yeah.
be banned. Because it's just, my wife did a master's degree through an online school and watching the hoops they had her jump through. And then as a security minded computational nerd, just kind of recreationally, okay, how would I break that in half?
Yeah.
And so it just serves as sort of a penalty on both students who are honest or students who are sleazy and uncreative. And so I feel like, thinking about what is a human problem and a teaching problem
Yes.
as a, sort of technology problem or as a something that we can buy our way out of through some third party service is just going to leave you in pain.
Yeah.
I don't see benefit to that. I think ultimately, if we think about this as being about people and about people's needs and about economics, you actually early on, I don't even remember when this was, but uh, said a quote along the lines of when we treat students like assignment factories, we shouldn't be that shocked when they outsource. And that
Yes.
has lived rent free in my head for
Oh,
like
wow.
6 years now.
Oh, I'm going to start
Um,
charging you royalties.
yeah, I know, right? But like every time I think about these things, it's like, yeah, I guess I should have seen that one coming.
Mm.
And that had actually a strong impact on my teaching,
Oh,
kind
wow.
of as I was making that shift of just like, yeah, am I incentivizing outsourcing? Uh,
Yeah. Well,
so, I think,
we say in the book, you can't design out cheating, but you can certainly design it in.
yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think there is there is no safety is maybe not the right vibe, but like there's no security from this, right? It's humans.
No, I mean we can get some level of security and we have to try in terms of at least the full degree, maybe not every assessment in every class, but we do have to have ways to measure, benchmarks and we also have to be comfortable with addressing cheating when it occurs, regardless, because
Absolutely.
students are humans and this is their opportunity to learn from that bad
Absolutely.
decision.
And
So
it's about
yeah.
learning at the end of the day.
Whether it's
Grading
learning the
doesn't matter,
content.
learning does.
Yeah, whether it's learning the content in your class or learning to make better ethical decisions in the future, it's always, always,
Absolutely.
always about learning, and which we say is the opposite of cheating. So thank you, Will, for being my first interview about this. I really appreciate your time and, as always, your energy and thoughts and passion for teaching and learning.
Thank you so much.